was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. That's all that Mark needed to tell his readers. They crucified him. Crucifixions, you see, were as common as roadside stands in Jesus' day. And as Adam Hamilton points out, those being crucified would only be about 2 to 3 feet off the ground, not the 10 feet or so that we normally picture in our minds people being crucified at that height. So Mark's readers were often up close and personal. The Romans made certain of that because they would often crucify people on main thoroughfares. There'd be dozens of people crucified along the main road going into Jerusalem, 2 to 3 feet off the ground, right in front of you. Children and everybody saw it. They knew all about crucifixions, but not us so much. I mean, absolutely, we see crosses all of the time, and yet the crosses that you and I usually see on a daily basis are attractive crosses, made of precious metals, sometimes diamonds and emeralds, or beautiful woods. They're wonderful things to behold. Now, everyone in our culture wears crosses, even people who have no or nominal beliefs, and we don't give those crosses a second thought, do we? Others of us have grown up in the church, perhaps saying the Apostles' Creed, right? Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. And we oftentimes said that every Sunday. And it just became another thing to do in order to, check it off the list in order to beat the Baptist to lunch, right? So what is it? What is it that those 3 little words, "they crucified him," actually mean? Well, they mean that after Jesus' back was whipped, as Dennis talked about last week, and after they forced him to carry a 75-pound crossbeam through the streets, he was stripped of his clothes, which reopened all of the wounds from his flogging, and his arms were stretched out on that crossbeam. 9-inch long nails were first driven through small wooden pieces, discs, to reduce the likelihood of the nail heads pulling through Jesus' flesh. Now, the point of entry in these crucifixions was critical. If they missed the proper spot, the nail would pierce a major artery and the victim would bleed out, which of course would defeat the whole goal that the Romans had in crucifying people, which was to prolong their suffering. And so, especially trained legionnaires, somebody almost with medical training, would feel carefully for the correct spot on the wrist, right up close to the wrist, but between certain bones in the wrist there. Finally, when the spot was found, in one horrifically painful blow, the nail was driven through the wrist and then into the crossbar. The crossbar was then lifted up into place on the stake, which was already in the ground, despite what you may have seen in other movies. Halfway up the cross was a piece of wood called the saddle, which held most of Jesus' weight so that the nails wouldn't tear through his feet or his wrists. Jesus' feet were then nailed to the cross. Now, recent archaeological discoveries have revealed that the traditional picture of one nail going through both feet was probably incorrect. More than likely, one nail, Jesus was forced to saddle the cross, one nail driven through that side, one nail driven through the other side. And as you can imagine, this was horrifically painful. In fact, our word excruciating is a compound of 2 Latin words, ex, meaning from, and cruciate, meaning to crucify. Crucifixion is literally the definition of unbearable pain. And yet, it wasn't quite enough to make the person pass out. Again, that would have defeated the point, which was to maximize pain and public humiliation. And the wounds, though they were terrible, weren't immediately fatal. And so Jesus hung on that cross, naked, beneath the blazing sun, from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., as the life drained out of him. And Jesus was fortunate. Some men, and it was only men, by the way, who were crucified. Women were never crucified. Some men would last 2 or 3 days on the cross in this agony. During this ordeal, Jesus could only talk in short bursts because of the stress on his diaphragm. And so each time Jesus spoke from the cross, he would press up on his legs to relieve some of the pressure on his chest, and he would blurt out brief phrases before collapsing painfully back down. Each word, those 12 words from the cross, right? Each word was incredibly painful. Eventually, Jesus, in excruciating pain, died of asphyxiation, blood loss, and dehydration. It pains me to go into such detail to describe it. I can see the pain on your faces too. And yet that is the most accurate description of those 3 little words that Mark utters: they crucified him. That's simply what they mean. But what do they mean to you? What do they mean to us as a congregation? In Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, about 9 blocks southeast of City Hall, there's a Catholic church. On the corner of that church is a cruel crucifixion scene, much like the one that I have just described to you. And at the base of the cross is this inscription: "What is it to you, O ye who pass by?" What is it to you, O ye who walk on by? Well, to those who pass by Jesus' original cross, in verses 29 through 30, Jesus' death was basically a power play. Yet another opportunity to mock someone who, according to their value system, was a social loser. Now, these folks must have known something about Jesus because they taunt him with Jesus' very own words about destroying the temple and building it back up again in 3 days. Many of them, maybe most of them, were probably in that joyful crowd on the first Palm Sunday. Many would have cheered him in on Monday when he entered Jerusalem as a hero in the victory parade. Just like we did this morning, they waved their palm branches and they shouted, "Hosanna!" which means, "Save us, O Lord." But what they meant specifically by that was, "Save us from Rome. Come and restore our military and political power that we used to have. Make Jerusalem great again," was these people's battle cry. And when it became clear that Jesus wasn't offering them that kind of power, they turned against him and they taunted him, saying, "Save yourself and come down from the cross." You know, only wimps would suffer like this. Maybe it's a little hard for us to admit that there's probably a little bit of passerbys in us this morning, isn't there? Like those in that first Palm Sunday parade, most of us are all for Jesus as long as he's willing to do things our way. But once we learn that his plan is for us to join him in costly and He's transforming the world through costly personal sacrifice, well, we'll turn on Him faster than the class bully turns on the class nerd. Or even more insidiously, we will twist Jesus' words and create our own, less offensive, culturally friendly gospel. This last week I was in Washington, D.C. with Matthew on a school trip, and we spent time in the Holocaust Museum. And there we saw how the church in Germany just went along with it. They changed the gospel. They removed the offense of the cross. I think in some ways we've done the same thing. We have created a faith that 60 years ago Richard Niebuhr, a theologian, described with these words: a God without wrath brings men without sin into a kingdom without judgment through the ministrations of a Christ without a cross. Oh, wow. Let me repeat that. A God without wrath brings men without sin into a kingdom without judgment through the ministrations of a Christ without a cross. I know some of you are upset. You wanted to come here for a nice Palm Sunday, Happy Children Waving sermon. I'm sorry. It's not in the cards today. And the Lord asks us through tear-stained eyes, what is it to you, O ye who pass by? And then there's the religious leaders in verses 31 and 32. To them, Jesus' crucifixion represented the elimination of a threat to their religious status quo. Like those who passed by, these good religious people also taunted Jesus cruelly, but they knew the more theologically exact words, such as Messiah and King of Israel. They were more refined and theologically aware than the passerbys we just talked about. And yet they lost sight of what was most important in their faith. And they ended up mocking Jesus just like the other base people. And there's probably some of that in us too, isn't there? It's easy for us to lose sight of what's most important in our faith also. It's easy for us to lose sight of our mission personally and as a congregation and focus instead on maintaining the status quo in the church and basically focusing on meeting the needs of those people, those of us who are inside of the walls of the church. That's important, I get that. That's not all there is. The church must never forget those who are outside of her walls. The moment the church forgets those who are outside of her walls, the church ceases to be the church and simply becomes a social club, another social club. And so we've got to keep our eyes focused on the cross. Most of us have been to the optometrist, and when we're there, we go through this, the peripheral vision test. You remember the peripheral vision test? You stick your chin up on this little brace kind of a thing, and then there's it's white, and there's a red plus sign, right? And it goes from the far left, around. You've done that, haven't you? Right? I read recently about a pastor who went to do that. And before the test, the assistant said something that really struck him. She said, now in order for this test to be successful, you must keep your eyes focused on the cross. In order for this test to be successful, you must keep your eyes focused on this cross. And so it is for us. In order for our church to be successful, we must keep our eyes focused on the cross, as painful as that is. We mustn't look to the left or to the right and be distracted by peripheral issues, personalities, or inconsequential issues. We must focus on doing the work of the church rather than church work, busy work. We must focus on the cross. Just as that Jesus kept his eyes focused on the cross. Through Palm Sunday to the Last Supper, through the Garden of Gethsemane to the trial before the Sanhedrin, through his trial before Pilate to his walk down the Via Dolorosa, Jesus stayed focused on the cross. He knew his mission of costly sacrifice, and he let nothing distract him from achieving it. And we at St. Paul Presbyterian Church, we have a mission of costly sacrifice also. A mission of costly sacrifice to reach the people of Johnston, Iowa, and the surrounding region. And God asks us, what is it to you, O ye who pass by? To bystanders now, in verses 35 to 36, Christ's death is basically a spectator sport. You know, there wasn't a whole lot of entertainment in Jesus' day, and if you didn't have a lot of money, and if you maybe weren't too culturally advanced, I suppose, you know, a crucifixion might be an interesting way to spend an afternoon, a Friday afternoon. So Luke tells us that a crowd had gathered there to see that spectacle on Golgotha. Like people drawn to the scene of an accident or a television program that capitalizes on other people's suffering, and there's all sorts of them out there. So these bystanders were drawn to this crucifixion of Jesus. When Jesus cried out in agony, some in the crowd were moved with pity, and they went to get him a sponge filled with wine in order to numb the pain. But others in the crowd said, no, wait, let's see if Elijah will come down and take him down. Now, they didn't care about Jesus and his suffering. They were there for a show, hoping that something spectacular, something supernatural might happen that Friday afternoon. Unfortunately, I suppose there's some of that in us too, isn't there? I mean, too often, let's be honest, we come to church basically to be entertained, right? I mean, we come for an inspiring, uplifting sermon that makes us feel good about ourselves and our own values and what our culture is all about. That's what we want. And if it doesn't, and if we come to church and if the sermon doesn't make us feel good, well then by God, we're just going to take our entertainment dollars and we're going to go somewhere else where they will make us feel good, won't we? Right? We come to be comforted mostly, not to be challenged. We want the joy of the Lord, but really we don't want the Lord himself, especially if he's there on a cross, a bloody cross. And so as 20% of the church members do 80% of the work in the church, like the crowd, we stand by and we watch as the suffering of the world multiplies. And God asks us, what is it to you, O ye who pass on by? What is Christ's death, suffering to you? Like the passerbys, is it just another example of how good guys finish last in the game of life? How stupid it is to suffer and to love other people? Like the religious leaders, is it an example of how we've lost sight of our mission? And now how we're almost indistinguishable from the world around us? Like the bystanders, is it a spectator sport that entertains and inspires but never challenges or inspires us to get out and go make a difference in the world? What is it to you? Well, thankfully, there's another option in this passage. And it comes from the most unlikely of all of the characters in this passage in Mark's Gospel. It comes from the Roman centurion. A Roman centurion in verse 39. This professional killer who had been trained in the art of crucifixion. This man who had probably watched hundreds of so-called messiahs get their just rewards on a cross. This man, after spending the last 6 hours of the last 24 hours of Jesus' life, cried out saying, "Truly this man was God's Son." This hardened torturer cried out, "Truly this man was God's Son." Now other soldiers, we know from the Gospel of Luke, cast lots for Jesus' few remaining earthly possessions. Focused only on earthly wealth, those soldiers completely missed Jesus' true value. But this soldier, moved by the dignity and the courage with which Christ faced his crucifixion, confessed Jesus to be God's Son. Amazing news. What is it to you, O ye who pass by? What is it to you? What is it to us? And will we confess him to be God's Son? And pick up our cross and follow him in costly sacrifice. Let us pray. Pierce our souls, O Lord, with the depth and the breadth and the height of the love that Jesus had for us and for each and every human being who has lived, who is living, and who shall live. Cut through the fog of our familiarity and our complicity, and help us to see yet again the meaning of the sacrifice for us, the meaning of the crucifixion for us. I praise you, Lord. Move us out of our individual and corporate status quo. Shake us up. Help us to live our lives for other people. People who don't know you. People in poverty. People who are hurting. Wake us up. Be with us. In Jesus' holy name. Amen. I invite you to stand as you are able.